Welty is the Downtown Development Program Director at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, or WEDC. She works primarily with Main Street and connected communities. She loves working with businesses, property owners, and community groups around the states to make projects a reality. Errin has an undergraduate degree in community development from St. Cloud State and a master's in planning and real estate from the University of Colorado in Denver. Her previous experience includes work in downtown organizations in St. Cloud, Wheat Ridge, and Denver, as well as commercial real estate, market analysis, and economic development consulting work. So thank you, Errin.
That's away from my computer. The computer guru. So I know you're a very diverse group, and I have to follow local celebrity and apparently budding comedian and emerging philosopher Jonathan, and before dinner. So I'm going to try to give you a little something for everybody. So my goal is that everybody takes away something that they can use in their local community from today. I have some kind of micro level stuff of what Ken talked about. A lot of the work I do is in small communities, though not all. Oops. See, I did the thing too. There we go. And so hopefully there's some stuff in here that is relevant to all of you. But to give you a little bit of background, so I work primarily with the Main Street program, which has been around in the state since for about 35 years, and I think Gene has been around Main Street program for most of that time. But the Main Street program is based around 4 points. So design, organization, promotion, and economic vitality. And I think that really fits with theaters as well, because theaters have all of those 4 points as kind of the crux of why they are important in your communities. So the organizational piece is, closely aligned with civic, and all of our theaters are a civic meeting place. It's where probably lots of communities were founded, where the rules were set, where organization happens. The physical and design world, most of the theaters, certainly the ones we saw this morning, are really the crown jewel of their communities. They are the iconic building that everybody says, well, if only that was restored, then our downtown would be thriving. On the economic vitality side, I have several case studies, and we've heard some today about how important theaters are to the economic prosperity of a community. And then on the social and promotion side, all theaters are about is bringing people together and celebrating and, honoring the arts. So then in addition, Main Street has 8 guiding principles, which is also closely aligned with the theater renovation. So the incremental, we heard, that it takes 7 years for some of these things to happen. I think the West Bend Theater, I met with a group in town the year after it closed, which I'm sure is 4 groups away from the group that actually ended up renovating it, because sometimes it takes that many tries to run at it to get a model that works. We heard from the Mabel Painter that it was 1 vote away from being torn down. These things are not easy. They're incremental. It's focused on self-help. The solution to solving theaters is never coming from outside. Someone in your community has to step up and take leadership. And focusing on existing assets and changing attitudes. So in the research that we've done, so I work again in Main Street Connect communities. So we have 100 and change communities in Wisconsin that we work with, downtowns, and then we have strong networks with our friends in Iowa and Illinois. So I collected a lot of theater data from them, because obviously we don't do everything best in Wisconsin. So I have some case studies from elsewhere. But I think in all the theater projects that I compiled, about 50% were owned or either owned initially by a city or a private nonprofit, and the remainder had city funding as part of the restoration process, because it takes a public-private partnership to make these things go. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that, why it matters. So if you're arguing with, folks that are voting to tear it down or keep it going, vacant buildings, and by extension vacant lots, do not generate revenue. They don't generate property tax. Parking lots have never paid for themselves in the history of the world. But it does take away from your community. So we did a study that looked at vacant buildings. So if you have a regular vacant store, storefront, 2 apartments upstairs, that's $76,000 in lost economic activity that's not happening within your district. So it's not just that, oh, that's a vacant building, it's so sad, but that property owner is impossible, what are we going to do? No, it's worth pursuing renovation just for the fact that it is detracting from your community. And buildings that are occupied and doing things, property taxes are twice as high as well, which is another reason that, obviously not for nonprofit theaters, but a reason that cities will care. So we did a study that looked at some of these findings, because coming to a community and saying, we're from the government, we're here to tell you how to make your business and your building better, doesn't go over very well. So we did a study of all the buildings in all of our communities that have renovated themselves in the last 5 years. And we found that 80% of the businesses had an increase in first-time customers, because you had all those people who said, how long have you been there? And you're like, I have been here for 20 years, thanks for noticing. But until that change happens, that's visual, people don't notice. And the same thing happens with theaters. Until something happens, it's just that property. No one, notices or cares. But certainly there is a lot of economic value that happens just from changing the look, changing the outside, and making people take notice. So I just have some examples, and these are not theaters. I don't even think I can pretend that anyone have theaters and or did. But the top one is my favorite case study, so I left the slide in. But it's as you can see in the sign, or probably you can't from back there, it is a bait and liquor store, as we have in Wisconsin. And it served bait and liquor, mostly to locals, because as you look at it, it does not look like a friendly place. This is in Green Lake, so there's lots of tourists. Guy bought the building next door, was turning into a bunch of Airbnb guest houses, and did not like this building next to him. So the city had just initiated a matching grant program, so you could match up to $5,000. So the guy next door put up $1,000 to get that to happen, because he was tired of looking at it and thought it took away from his guest experience. But it's amazing for $2,200, a sign, some lights, and some paint. He got a 20% increase in first-time customers, and I'm sure a lot more increase in sales just as a result of that small investment. So small things matter, incremental. So the role of theaters, preaching to the choir, but obviously they're why we're here today. They have had a huge historic role in all of our communities, whether it was hosting, Abraham Lincoln, which has happened. Apparently Harry Houdini, though, is much more famous than the presidents that have been in town. But it's really, people's identity and sense of self in a community is tied up in that theater. Like, this happened here, we were important once because we hosted these people. We have this gorgeous theater, so think what our community was at one point in time. And then today, in order to make ends meet, theaters are a whole lot of things, and lots of times they're like 20 different things at once. They are wedding venues or private business meetings we heard about, or they're movie theaters, or they host bands, or they are comedy clubs. But they do all of these things to bring the people in and have gatherings. The average of the theaters we surveyed have 15 hours a week of programming and 2 staff. So obviously the spillover effect, as Ken mentioned, is a lot bigger. But they're filling a lot of needs within the community. So I have some case studies, and I don't know if you could read all the stuff that's on these, but I'm sure we can make the slides available to you. But I just wanted to highlight, so Ken mentioned the importance of telling your story. So this theater in Manistee is a movie theater. It's 40 miles from the next nearest movie theater, which is why it can be successful as a movie theater, because there are no other choices. It is the movie theater that you go to if you happen to be from up here. But at the beginning of every movie that they show, they have a brief narrated video that shows the history of the theater and its restoration. So no one can ever forget what it took to get this looking the way it does. And the DDA, the city DDA, took the leap first to take the possession of the property when it was falling into disrepair. And they had more than 700 individuals step up to volunteer, which is another trend we've heard, their time to make this happen. And they still average about 300 weekly volunteer hours in addition to the staff to put on the events that they do. I love this case study, and this is from Massachusetts, a slightly, more populated area, not my rural, but they did some great job collecting data, which is obviously key to telling your story, is having the actual information on your theater and the impact to back it up. So they found that 10 to 15% of all the restaurant and retail spending was attributable to theater audiences that were in town. They surveyed their audiences to find out if they went to other businesses while they were there. And 75% of theater visitors reported visiting other businesses, 57% restaurants, 38% retail, and 5% both. so they could demonstrate what level of spending was happening because of them. And they also found that theater visitors were 20% more likely to be traveling for more than 60 miles away. So these were destination visitors, not just locals that they're bringing to the community. And then this is a tiny town in Iowa, Mount Pleasant. When they sent me their stuff, my favorite quote was, 65 to 70% of our population is retired. They don't want newfangled stuff. They wanted this stuff. They wanted their stuff back. So this is a really small renovation, $450,000 basically, half funded by the city. And there's second floor residential units upstairs, and that basically essentially pays for the basic operations of the theater and the kind of overhead. And then they're able to, be what they were and just make it work for a tiny town. This is from Wisconsin, but I had to include it because I don't think anybody in Wisconsin is aware of such cool things that we have. So this is a theater. It's a Quonset hut. It was one of 93 Quonset hut theaters. There's only 6 left in the whole, world. Might be a stretch. But it was designed and built by baseball player Cy Williams. So we have a baseball player designed and built and run theater. And it was closed in the 50s and really kind of since then. And in 2007, there was an anonymous donor who put $250,000 up for people to buy it, open as an art center. There was a lot of volunteer labor again that went in at about $400,000 in cost. And now there's an art gallery, a gift shop, a performing arts, a movie theater, classroom space, and upstairs apartment. So talk about being all things to make it work in a tiny town. But now they have a film festival, a music crawl. They're doing all kinds of cool things that are bringing folks in that would have never been to Three Lakes because it is not on a highway or anywhere else that you would ever manage to go. So the other reason that theaters are important is because there's something in the tourism world called the rule of 4. So it basically says if I will travel a fourth the time as I plan to spend somewhere. So if you think about, I'm going out to a restaurant, I'm going to spend an hour there, I'll probably drive about 15 minutes to get there. If I'm going to drive an hour, I expect to spend 4 hours, once I'm there. I'm not going to drive an hour, have, dinner and drive an hour back. Like that would take an exceptional destination to make that happen. So for our downtown work, we really talk about bundling. You need to be able to bundle those experiences so a visitor from, an hour or more away is going to be able to see what it's going to take. What can I spend my time doing? What is going to make it worth traveling there? And theaters are a really big part of that because entertainment and dining are kind of the two things that take the longest, right? Shopping, even if you're a shopaholic, an hour and a half, maybe? You can't shop forever. But if you have to sit and eat and then maybe have a drink, but if you can add a theater experience onto that, you can really multiply the level of travel that people can justify. So there are some of our communities certainly that, you can do events, you can do music events, but it's real easy if you already have a theater that's doing that programming for you to just bundle that. So you can offer dinner and a movie package, you can offer, matinees with ice cream, and you can package those events together to really cater to a much broader audience than you can alone. And we also have kind of some summaries of tourism impact. Obviously, the American for the Arts, I think Ken mentioned some of these data. I love the one in Rock Springs, Wyoming, because they are all about demonstrating the visible increase in foot traffic on their evenings and weekends, which is 35% higher. So they have trail cams that take pictures of everybody that cross it. Again, small towns, nickel and dime. Everybody's got a trail cam, just set it up. But there's another community I'll show you later. They do it by pictures, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So they go out on a theater night, there happens to be an ice cream parlor down the street, and they just take a picture of the length of the ice cream line on nights when they have shows and say, look, ice cream line has reached the toy store today, ice cream line all the way to the corner. But it really demonstrates, hey, look how many people are coming. And then even locally within the community, you're like, oh, I must be missing out on something. What's in town? Look at all those people who are out because the theater's holding something. And then when we look at the customer events compared to type, so there's sporting events and your fall fests and your wine walks and your bike rallies and all that kind of thing. Art spending is really stands up and competes well. So the average per visitor spending is about $23 to $96. Obviously depends if you're local and just stopping by for the afternoon, or if you're traveling for an overnight because you're going to stay there for a couple days. and the percent of spending that's happening outside the event is more than half. So, I might have to buy a ticket, or I might be buying something, concessions, which we heard were really important at the theater. But half of that spending are those 75% of people who are going to other shops and restaurants as part of their experience. And obviously, if they're coming from farther away, so destination visitors, anybody from more than an hour, they're spending twice as much because they probably have to buy a hotel room, or they're traveling quite a bit further, so they're going to maximize that. So kind of the upshot of all of this is that measuring your impact is really important, and it's great to cite those national studies or even the numbers that I have of theaters are important because on average we create 39 jobs, or on average we do this. But lots of you probably have the information on your theaters or in your communities to demonstrate your own impact. So here's that ice cream line that I was telling you about. But lots of you have, ticketed events are amazing. So the data that you get from ticketing sites, you get zip codes, you get average party size, you get genders sometimes. So you can say, hey, 50% of our attendees are women. The average travel time is 35 miles. The average party size is 3. It's not precise, but you get a pretty good idea of who's coming in your theater. And you can share that information with local businesses who might want to market to them, or you might be trying to convince to do a dinner and a package show. You can do also from observation, obviously foot traffic, if you can count them. Either in a previous life, I paid the local Rotary to sit at the coffee shop with clickers during events and just count how many people went by different corners. They are more than happy to do it if you pay for their, coffee or beer while they're doing it. They'll just sit there and count for you. Or you can use trail cams or, technology if that works for you. Parking, you can look at how full parking lots are. If you have a drone, you can just take a picture and be like, hey, our parking lots are 25% fuller on days we have an event than other days. You can also survey your merchants, obviously. My favorite are when we look at what percent of businesses are open, in the years before the theater opened on a Friday night and versus that afterwards, because lots of times once they see the traffic, then you have more people open, which is probably the third biggest complaint we get in communities is how do I get my businesses to stay open after 5? After where is the free money and what do I do with the slumlord? Those are the first two. The third is how do I get my businesses to stay open? But the trick to collecting your data is that you can't do it after the fact, right? If you don't plan to collect the information while they're there, if you don't do that survey that talks about what's the best thing is parking and the worst thing is parking, if you don't ask people, people love to be asked. If you don't ask people, then you can't get that information after the fact, but it is super valuable and nobody can really argue with you if you've collected it. So some pitfalls, and I told people who are in this room that are on these slides that they've been in advance, so in some cases they haven't seen that. We've heard a lot about this today. I think Katie did a great job of summarizing some of the stuff. I mean, we've heard about, butts being bigger today, and needing bigger seats, which is a real thing. Obviously the sound and the aesthetics are usually always amazing, and you don't have to do anything to address those. But seat size, having a bar, real concessions is important. Power and loading, we heard about with the West Penn Theater, these are things that you can think about in advance that might help make more money on the back end, because it's great and also really hard to raise the money on the front end, but you want to make sure that as you're doing these build outs, you maximize yourself for profits ongoing, so we don't have to be in this situation again in 10 years because we need to change something. Backstage area, dressing rooms, especially if you're commuting a movie theater, pre-function transition spaces. I have several of our communities, they have brought in sound guys or power guys from traveling acts that they would like to get to kind of consult on the project, right? Like, this is an outdoor space, but Chippewa Falls did that beautiful outdoor amphitheater, and they brought the sound guy from Bon Iver to come in and say, where should we put the sound and the speakers and things if you were going to be here? And he was happy to tell them because he lived locally. But that's invaluable information, right? And now they have a spot where people actually want to perform because it's set up the way the guys would actually want it to be, and they're not trying to work around it. So I just have examples. So we had Menominee as one of our main streets, and so this is the famous maple painter that you heard all about. We hired a local architect to come in at one point and do some streetscaping stuff. And the parking lot with its 10 stalls, which is not doing anything to support the Mabel really, drove him nuts. So he included, this was not part of his scope, but he included a rendering of the Mabel with the pre-function space so that you could have a cocktail garden. So if you did have a wedding, you could have a cocktail hour as you turned the venue from a wedding event into a reception hall. So that was one example. This is the Traverse City Opera House on the right. And we heard about several people about buying extra properties. They had to buy that extra property in order to get the elevator, the green rooms, and dressing rooms. They just didn't fit in the building that they had. And then the Temple Theater, which Jess is here. They have the encore space next door, so you can do concessions, again, drink, dining, cocktail hour, because if you're going to have private events, that's something that those folks are going to look for, and we're just people who want to pay a lot of money to drink wine with famous people, or well-dressed people. So other pitfalls, probably another big complaint that we hear in some of our communities when there are theater projects, either just getting off the ground, or maybe they have a board of directors that has been in place for a while, is that they're exclusionary. So this is the Red Cloud, Nebraska is a good cautionary tale. They had a famous alumni who had left town and become famous and rich, and funded basically a museum to herself. So she restored the theater and created a museum to herself and created a society that would own it. And they have other things that they do there, but the perception in that small town of that event center is that it is not for them, because it was not done with them, they're not part of it, it was not for them. And so it does not provide the benefits that you would hope that it would. And we have other communities where the board of directors maybe is not as inclusive as they might be, and we hear about that when that's the case. And obviously, if you want to maximize your donor pool, having people feel invested is important. I think Jeff's stories were great. You want your kids to have been on there, you want your grandkids to have been on there, you want everybody and their brother to have been in that building for something to feel invested. And then the last one is kind of related to that operating strategy. It's kind of a fulcrum, right? You have these great physical improvements and you're investing $5 million in renovating it, and you have all these grand plans for operating it and programming, and you're going to have 15 events every week. But really, what's that management capacity? If you have 2 staff, you're really going to struggle to maintain that level of facility and programming, and you're just going to burn people out. So how do we create that volunteer pool so that it's more of a wedge instead of a ball that starts rolling and the whole thing goes sideways? And these are just some really innovative things that I found from other small communities that I thought were truly inspirational. So the Center Theater in Maine is known for its message board fundraiser, and they do it a couple times a year, but they do it around wedding season and graduation season specifically. And I don't know what the price is anymore, but it used to be like $100, and you would get your custom message there. So when you did your senior pictures or when you did your wedding, you would have, congratulations, Brian and Diana, and then that would be the picture you had to take for your wedding. And so they had a volunteer that would just show up, on Saturday and change the marquee like 16 times, because you get like 15 minutes. But you can make a lot of money in a morning just changing out letters to make it look cool, and then bringing the photographers in. So I thought that was pretty brilliant. Darlington has a 100 Men and 100 Women campaign, where they ask you to be part of the top 100 women or top 100 men civic leaders in the community, which who could say no to an invitation to be one of the top 100 women? And in a community of 3,000, you can get quite a bit of your population that way. The soda pop bar, and I don't have a picture that does this justice, but my kids, we found it this summer on vacation. It's in Cody, Wyoming. Small community, obviously big tourism market, but my kids think it is the coolest thing they have ever seen in their entire life. It is a former theater, but their concession stand, when there's not theater, is open, and they do all the flavored popcorn, which is super popular right now, and they also have a soda cocktail bar. So if you want grape soda mixed with Sprite with Nerds candy in it, this is the place to go. There are the lines of children coming in for like popcorn and fancy kids drinks is out the door. But it's something for them, and it makes the theater theirs. And it's just, it's very unique, and it's like going out for ice cream. But they thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen in their life. There's a virtual reality theater where every so often they turn their theater to a virtual reality experience. And then there's a couple of crowd-funded projects that we've encountered. You can crowd-fund anything. You can crowd-fund bars. but where you guys should become a shareholder in the community, spend $200 or $2,000 or whatever the scale that you need, and then you're an actual investor in the community. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say also, Cuba Loans are 0% loans up to $10,000 for smaller projects, and those are open to nonprofits as well. And so we actually have a match for those loans that are in our Main Street or Connect communities that are women, minority, or veteran-led. So if you happen to have be in one of our communities, that's another option that's out there. It's open to everybody without the match, regardless. And then I had some resources, which includes the League of Theaters, which obviously Ken already talked about, and then some others that I found useful over the time. And I would be happy to hang out and answer any questions, maybe not in this hot tent, that you might have, or just hear about your fun small community, because that is what I do. But if you have questions, then I'll take them too. Yes, Mark?
Do you have enough knowledge this time for the news release that came out this morning regarding venues and the grants?
I don't. So just this morning, the application's open for the movie theater small performance venue, something grants was released, but I don't have, other than it is now open and it's on the DOA website, I don't have any other details, because I can't pull it up on my phone to tell you about it. I saw it before I left this morning, though. Yeah. So the question is how tourists can access theaters when they're not open, as part of a self experience. There are certainly some that have kind of volunteer docents who work in the office and are around. We also have some that have kind of little retail areas, or like I said, the Cody has the little concessions that's open all the time, and then you do have someone that's there. I think it's more common to have, to offer an optional tour time every day, at 2 if anyone's... Yeah, I mean, that would be a great idea. There are certainly venues that have, if you want to see this cool theater, text whatever, we'll come give you a tour, or ring this bell. Certainly in a small community, someone's next door and can be found. There are some that are open kind of like churches where it's, you assume that people will be respectful. It really depends on where you're at. Other questions? Alright, well, if there are after the fact, let me know. I will be around.